This is the meeting they didn't want you to see. 4 flags, 4 leaders, 1 table, and an empty chair where the American flag used to sit. As of this morning, Sunday, March 8th, 2026, the Western Alliance as we have known it for 77 years is over. Not wounded, not strained, over. Breaking news out of London, Paris, Berlin, and Ottawa has sent shockwaves through every intelligence agency, every embassy, and every war room on the planet. Canada, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany have just signed the Atlantic Democratic Defense Compact, a new mutual defense treaty, a binding military alliance with its own command structure, its own nuclear umbrella, and its own Article 5 equivalent. And the United States of America was not invited, not consulted, not informed until the ink was dry. For the first time since 1949, America's oldest and closest allies have looked at Washington and said, "We don't trust you to protect us anymore." We are talking about nations that stormed the beaches of Normandy beside us. We are talking about countries that invoked Article 5 after September 11th, the only time in NATO's history. We are talking about the 4 eyes of the 5 Eyes intelligence network building a wall around America's access. We are talking about the end of the American century. In this special report, we are going to break down exactly how this happened. We are going to reveal the leaked diplomatic cables that show this has been in the works for 11 months. We are going to explain the nuclear dimension that changes everything. And we are going to answer the question that should terrify every American. What happens when the world decides it doesn't need us anymore? Buckle up. The world just changed, and Washington slept through it. To understand why 4 allied leaders gathered in a secret session at Lancaster House in London this weekend, we have to go back to the fracture point. Remember the NATO summit in The Hague last July? The one where European allies plus Canada agreed to Trump's demand for 5% of GDP on defense spending by 2035? That was the moment the private conversation started. According to leaked diplomatic cables first reported by Der Spiegel's intelligence desk, French President Emmanuel Macron pulled aside British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz during a bilateral sidebar and said 7 words that changed history. He said, "We cannot depend on this man anymore." Starmer reportedly nodded. Merz said nothing. But within 72 hours, the 3 leaders had established a classified back-channel communication system run through the French DGSE, outside of 5 Eyes, outside of NATO secure channels, outside of anything American intelligence could monitor. They called it Operation Burnham Wood. The Shakespeare reference was deliberate. Just as Burnham Wood moved to Dunsinane and brought down the tyrant in Macbeth, these allies intended to move an entire alliance structure without Washington seeing it coming. But the real catalyst wasn't the spending demands. It was Greenland. When Trump threatened military action against Denmark, a NATO ally, to seize Greenland's mineral resources, something broke inside the alliance that could never be repaired. Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, reportedly told Macron in a private call, "He is threatening to invade us. We are in NATO to be protected from invasion, not subjected to it." Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, who took office calling the Trump era a rupture in transatlantic relations, became the 4th pillar. Canada shares an Arctic border with Greenland. If America was willing to take territory from a NATO ally by force, Canada was next. The intelligence assessment from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, leaked to the Globe and Mail last month, concluded that American military planning documents included contingency operations for northern resource access that explicitly referenced Canadian Arctic sovereignty. Ottawa panicked. Carney called Starmer on a secure line and said, "We're in." And here's where it really gets serious. This isn't just a political statement. This isn't a strongly worded communique. The Atlantic Democratic Defense Compact is a legally binding mutual defense treaty with teeth. Let me walk you through the architecture. Article 1 establishes the principle of collective defense. An attack on one signatory is an attack on all. Sound familiar? It should. It's Article 5 of the NATO treaty, word for word, except NATO's version has an asterisk next to it now because the American president has said publicly, repeatedly, that he won't honor it for nations that don't pay enough. The new compact has no asterisk. Article 2 establishes a joint military command headquarters in Brussels, not at NATO headquarters, across the city, a parallel command structure with its own secure communications, its own intelligence fusion center, and its own operational planning staff. Sources inside the British Ministry of Defense tell us that 340 officers from the four nations have already been quietly reassigned to this new command over the past 6 months, listed on paper as NATO liaison positions. Article 3 is the bombshell, the nuclear clause. France and the United Kingdom, the only two nuclear powers outside of the United States and Russia in the Western world, have agreed to extend their nuclear deterrent umbrella over all four signatory nations. This means Germany and Canada, for the first time in their history, are covered by a nuclear guarantee that does not run through Washington. The implications of this are staggering. Since 1949, the entire architecture of Western nuclear deterrence has been built on the assumption that American warheads protect Europe. That assumption just died. Don't go anywhere. The most explosive part is coming next. Let's talk about what this means for NATO itself, because this is where the constitutional and legal crisis becomes an existential one for American power. NATO doesn't have an expulsion mechanism. You can't kick a country out, but you can build a new house next door and move all the furniture. That is exactly what is happening. The Atlantic Democratic Defense Compact doesn't formally withdraw from NATO. The four nations remain members on paper, but they have created a parallel alliance that renders NATO hollow. It is a shell, a building in Brussels with American generals talking to themselves. Here's what nobody in the mainstream media is telling you. 14 additional NATO members have been privately briefed on the compact and given the option to join. According to a source inside the Dutch Foreign Ministry who spoke to Reuters on background, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, Poland, Finland, Sweden, and the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, have all indicated preliminary interest. That is 14 of NATO's 32 members ready to walk into the new alliance. If they do, NATO doesn't just weaken. It ceases to function as a military alliance. The integrated command structure, the logistics chains, the intelligence sharing agreements, all of it collapses without European participation. The Pentagon knows this. Sources inside the Office of the Secretary of Defense tell us that a classified assessment was delivered to the White House Situation Room at 4:30 a.m. this morning. The assessment reportedly concludes that the formation of the ADDC represents the most significant realignment of Western military alliances since the founding of NATO in 1949. It further concludes that American forward deployed forces in Europe, approximately 80,000 troops across Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom, may face access and basing complications within 12 to 18 months if host nations transition their primary alliance obligations to the new compact. Let me translate that from Pentagon speak. Our troops might get evicted from European bases, the air bases in Ramstein and Lakenheath, the naval station in Rota, Spain, the intelligence facilities in Menwith Hill, England, all of it potentially on the table. The 2026 National Defense Strategy already designated Europe as a secondary theater. The Europeans just took that designation literally and said, fine, if we're secondary to you, you're secondary to us. And here's where it gets personal for the administration. This is a humiliation of historic proportions. The president who promised America first has delivered America alone. The art of the deal has produced the worst deal in diplomatic history. Every ally that Trump threatened, bullied, tariffed, and insulted over the past decade just formed a club specifically designed to exclude him. The White House response so far has been chaotic. Press secretary issued a statement at 6:15 a.m. calling the compact a meaningless gesture by ungrateful nations who owe their freedom to American blood. Sources inside the West Wing described the president as apoplectic. He reportedly told his national security advisor, they can't do this. We own NATO. We built it. We paid for it. But here's the legal reality. They can do this. There is nothing in the NATO treaty, nothing in international law, nothing in any bilateral agreement that prevents sovereign nations from forming additional defense alliances. America did it. We have bilateral treaties with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines outside of any multilateral framework. The allies are simply applying America's own playbook back at America. Let's get technical about the financial dimension because this is the kill shot that nobody is discussing. The European Union's Rearm Europe initiative, launched in March 2025, has already mobilized close to 800 billion euros in defense spending commitments. The SAFE instrument alone provided 150 billion euros in joint procurement loans. European defense expenditure hit 381 billion euros in 2025, a 62% increase from 2020. And Germany, the sleeping giant of European defense, has undergone its most dramatic military transformation since reunification. Friedrich Merz pushed through a constitutional amendment to exempt defense spending from Germany's debt brake. The Bundeswehr's budget has jumped from 52 billion euros to an estimated 95 billion in 2026. Germany is now the third largest military spender in NATO, behind only the United States, and ironically, the country that just locked them out. Here's the number that matters. The combined military spending of just the four ADDC founding members, the United States excluded, is approximately $290 billion annually. That is larger than Russia's entire military budget, even adjusted for purchasing power parity. These aren't weak nations begging for protection. These are wealthy, technologically advanced democracies with nuclear weapons, blue water navies, and fifth-generation fighter aircraft. They don't need us. That is the sentence that should keep every American strategist awake tonight. They don't need us anymore. But the financial contagion doesn't stop at defense budgets. The dollar implications are catastrophic. The ADDC treaty includes a provision, Article 7, that establishes a joint defense procurement currency mechanism denominated in euros. This means that hundreds of billions of dollars in weapons purchases that historically flowed through American defense contractors, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, will now be redirected to European manufacturers: Dassault Aviation, BAE Systems, Rheinmetall, Leonardo. The defense industrial base that has been America's golden goose since 1945 just lost its biggest customers. Shares of Lockheed Martin dropped 6.2% in pre-market trading this morning. Raytheon fell 7.8%. The Dow futures are down 340 points, and this is before the Asian markets open. When Tokyo, Seoul, and Sydney see that America's allies are running, not walking, away from Washington's security umbrella, the contagion will spread to the Pacific. Watch Japan, watch Australia, watch South Korea. If they sense the same unreliability, they will start building their own arrangements. The Pax Americana isn't fraying, it is being dismantled by our own allies in broad daylight while we watch. Now let's push the scenario to the extreme, because the military implications are where this becomes terrifying for American national security. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the most intimate intelligence sharing arrangement in the world between the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, is now functionally compromised. Two of the Five Eyes, Britain and Canada, have just formed a military alliance that explicitly excludes the United States. Intelligence officials at the NSA and CIA are reportedly in emergency session trying to assess what this means for signals intelligence sharing, satellite reconnaissance, and human intelligence networks across Europe and the Middle East. A former senior CIA officer, speaking on condition of anonymity, told a Washington-based reporter this morning, if London and Ottawa are running a parallel command with Paris and Berlin, they can't share everything with us anymore. Operational security demands it. We just lost 40% of our global intelligence collection capability in one morning. That 40% figure is devastating. American intelligence has always relied on British and Canadian assets to fill gaps in coverage. GCHQ in Cheltenham, England, is the most capable signals intelligence operation outside of Fort Meade. The communications security establishment in Ottawa provides irreplaceable Arctic and polar intelligence. Without full integration, America goes partially blind in precisely the regions that matter most. How does this play in the heartland? How does the MAGA base process the idea that America's best friends just ghosted us? Here's where the psychology splits. The loyal base will see this as confirmation. They'll say the Europeans were always ungrateful. They were always freeloaders. Good riddance. Let them defend themselves. We don't need them. But that narrative collapses the moment you look at the map. Without European basing rights, American power projection into the Middle East, into Africa, into the Arctic, all of it becomes exponentially harder and more expensive. Ramstein Air Base in Germany isn't just a building, it is the central nervous system of American military operations across 3 continents. Losing access to it would be like losing your right arm and trying to box with your left. The donors know this. The defense industry CEOs know this. The senators on the Armed Services Committee know this. And behind closed doors, the whispers have already started. He pushed them too far. He lost the alliance. This is irreversible. The invisible primary for 2028 just accelerated by 2 years. What does Putin think when he sees this? What does Xi Jinping think? They see exactly what they have always wanted: a fractured West, an isolated America, an alliance system built on trust that no longer trusts its own leader. Putin has spent 25 years trying to split NATO. He invaded Georgia, he annexed Crimea, he launched a full-scale war in Ukraine, and he couldn't do it. Donald Trump just did it for him without firing a single shot. The Kremlin issued a statement at noon Moscow time, calling the development a natural consequence of American imperial overreach and expressing readiness to engage in new security dialogues with the emerging European defense architecture. Translation: Putin is ready to cut a deal with Europe that cuts America out. And Europe, exhausted by American unreliability on Ukraine, might listen. History teaches us that alliances shatter not from external pressure, but from internal betrayal. The concert of Europe collapsed, not because of foreign invasion, but because its members stopped trusting each other. The League of Nations died not because of enemy attack, but because its most powerful member refused to participate. Now America is becoming the member that its own allies are building walls around. This is exactly what the founders warned about. Washington's farewell address in 1796 cautioned against entangling alliances, but the deeper irony cuts like a blade. We spent 77 years building the most successful military alliance in human history, one that kept the peace across an entire continent, won the Cold War without a single direct battle between superpowers, and expanded democracy to 32 nations. The North Atlantic Treaty was signed on April 4th, 1949, in a ceremony that lasted less than an hour. It took less than a decade to dismantle the trust that treaty represented. Think about what we're losing. The NATO integrated command structure took 40 years to build. The intelligence sharing protocols took 3 generations of officers to perfect. The interoperability standards that allow a German tank crew to communicate seamlessly with a British artillery battery took billions of dollars and thousands of joint exercises. All of that institutional knowledge, all of that muscle memory, is now being replicated in a new building across Brussels with one critical difference. Americans aren't in the room. The emoluments of empire are being stripped away, not by enemies, by friends who finally decided that friendship with America had become a liability. The 25th Amendment conversation is already starting in whispered tones on Capitol Hill, not because the president is mentally incapacitated, but because the question is being asked openly for the first time. Is a president who has alienated every major ally, who has threatened to invade NATO members, who has triggered the dissolution of the Western Alliance, capable of discharging the duties of his office? The answer from 4 allied capitals this morning was devastating in its silence. They didn't call for his removal. They simply stopped waiting for him. They moved on. As we wrap this analysis, understand the gravity. This isn't just a diplomatic spat. This is the stress test of the American-led world order. Can a superpower survive when its friends decide they're safer without it? Can the republic endure when the president's personal vendettas override 77 years of strategic architecture? We are in uncharted waters. The maps that guided American foreign policy since Harry Truman signed the North Atlantic Treaty are useless now. The compass is spinning. The lighthouse has gone dark. Watch the Asian markets when they open tonight. Watch for the inevitable Truth Social storm from the White House. Watch for the Pentagon's response, because it will not be a press release. It will be a force posture review, a repositioning of carrier groups, a reclassification of former allies. Watch Poland, because if Warsaw joins the compact, the entire eastern flank of European defense pivots away from American command. And watch the defense stocks on Monday morning, because Wall Street will deliver its verdict on America alone. But most importantly, watch the 4 flags now flying over Lancaster House in London, Canada, the United Kingdom, France, Germany, 4 nations that fought beside us in 2 world wars, that mourned with us on September 12, 2001, that buried their soldiers in Afghan mountains for our mission. They looked at America in 2026 and said, "We love you, but we no longer trust you with our survival." And they built something new without us. For one nation sitting in the most powerful office on earth, watching its allies walk away in formation, this is the reckoning. The sheriff isn't at the door, the neighbors just moved out. And the strongest nation on earth is standing alone in an empty cul-de-sac, wondering what happened. Subscribe. Stay tuned. The history books aren't just being written this weekend. They are being rewritten, and America isn't holding the pen. Let's get technical about one more dimension that the cable news networks will miss entirely, because this is the financial mechanism that guts American leverage for a generation. The ADDC treaty includes a classified annex, details of which were leaked to the Financial Times overnight, establishing what insiders are calling the Windsor Protocol. This protocol creates a mutual defense investment bank headquartered in London, capitalized at 100 billion euros, with the explicit mandate to fund defense research, development, and procurement exclusively from member nation industries. Every dollar that used to flow to Bethesda, Maryland, to the headquarters of Lockheed Martin, now has an alternative destination. Every contract that used to default to American manufacturers now has a European competitor with sovereign backing and zero-interest financing. The F-35 program, the crown jewel of American defense exports, just got a competitor it can't out-lobby. Because you can't lobby a government that doesn't want to talk to you anymore.